5 first home buyer tips. That is what we're going to be breaking down in today's video. I was 25 years of age when I bought my first property, and I wish someone sat me down at that time and ran me through a few things that we're going to be discussing in today's video. So that's what this video is about. Right, the first thing off the list is it's exciting time. You're saving for a home. I recommend you save up 20% deposit of the purchase price. And this could be within a bit of a range depending on how much you're looking at spending. But the reason being for this is, especially in Australia and New Zealand here, we have a thing that's known as lender's mortgage insurance. And this is a bit of a safety net for the bank where they require another form of insurance if you don't have the full deposit being 20%, which is quite challenging at the current market because everything is overly priced. It seems no matter where you look, the property prices are going up, which can be quite unattainable sometimes, especially when you're just starting out on your investing journey or buying your first home to live in. That can seem like quite a faraway goal. I have recently made a video how you can actually save up your deposit within your super, and there's some very good tax benefits around that, so I highly recommend you check that out. So that's my very first tip. Make sure you save up a 20% deposit, mainly so you don't have to pay that lender's mortgage insurance, which is basically a cop-out from the bank. Nothing's coming off your principal or interest. It's just another payment that you have to make up until you make up that 20% equity within the property, and then the lender's mortgage insurance will cease from there on in. So it's definitely a good goal to have that 20% deposit, I feel. But that can, like I said, that can be quite challenging, especially when you're saving for your first property. But that should be the very first thing you try and focus on, saving up that 20%. Depends who you listen to. Some people say you should only get 10% or whatever. Like I say, I think 20% is a good goal to strive for when looking at buying your first home. So number 2, now that you've got close to or you have 20% deposit saved up for your first property, I recommend talking to your bank. Now this is quite a lengthy process depending on your employment status, whether you're part-time, casual, self-employed. There's a lot of paperwork that you need in order to keep the banks happy, especially if you're employed just with a regular job working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, it's fairly straightforward, and especially if you've been with that employer for a number of years, shouldn't be too hard. It gets a bit tricky when you're self-employed. They want to see at least 2 years of financials and tax returns in order to keep them happy. And even some point in the moment in Australia, they're almost not lending to anyone that is self-employed or running their own business, which can make it quite challenging. Or if you're a casual as well, which is another thing. Especially in Australia at the moment, there is a lot of casual work, especially in the mining sector, which is a sector that I currently work in myself. In the oil and gas sector, a lot of the contracts we do are all just short-term casual contracts, maybe even only month by month. Can be quite challenging getting that over the line with the bank. So once you've saved up that deposit, definitely the number 2 thing to do is talk to the bank. Try and get pre-approval over the line for the figure that you're looking at getting, whatever that may be. Generally the bank may overshoot on but you don't have to spend what they will give you. You don't want to, if they say they're going to give you $1 million, you don't have to spend $1 million. Remember that as well. Always sort of keep within that budget and how much you can afford to pay back as well. You don't want to over leverage yourself up buying a $1.3 million home when you can't afford the payments. Especially bear in mind at the moment interest rates are very low, but they won't stay low forever. So also factor that into your calculations. Give yourself a few percentage points. A margin of safety there was if the interest rates do rise, they can't really get any lower. So there's only one way they can go, and that's up. So definitely factor that in when you're looking at buying your first property and look at getting your first mortgage. Now there's a couple of different ways you can go about getting a mortgage. You can either talk directly to the bank. Generally, obviously, they're going to be favouring their own mortgages that they offer, or you can talk to a broker. I've done both. I've talked to brokers. I have a pretty good broker I use in New Zealand. Also used a broker here in Australia as well. And to be fair, they get pretty similar interest rates to what the banks offer, but they shop around. They have different lenders, and so in each lenders they are very similar, but they do have certain different criteria that changes between each bank. So I don't know, you could go either way with this. Either talk to your bank if you have a good relationship with your bank manager, maybe you could just talk to them, or maybe your friend knows a mortgage broker, definitely get in touch with them as well, as they can advise a little bit around the best mortgage to take on. And like I said, especially if your employment history is a little bit different, it's not just the stock standard Monday to Friday, been working that job for 10 years sort of thing, it may be worthwhile spending some time chatting to a broker. Usually it doesn't cost you anything. A lot of the costs get pushed back to the bank. They get paid a commission for signing you up to a mortgage, so that's how they sort of make their money on it usually. But they will give you a breakdown of their costs and how that's involved. But generally, from my experience, I haven't actually had to pay the brokers anything. They just get a trailing kickback from the bank for signing me up to a mortgage. So just to quickly wrap that up, here's some documents that you'll want to take to the bank. Ideally 3 months of pay slips, also 3 months of all your bank transactions, your coming and goings from your everyday spending account. Also, one thing to watch out for is your credit card. Let's say you have a credit card and it has a $50,000 limit. It may be paid back to zero. The bank will still look at that as that you've got $50,000 negative, which they'll use against you. So definitely I would recommend reducing your credit card limit, especially if you have a high limit on your credit card. Reduce that back to maybe $5,000. That way they'll only look at that you have the capability to spend $5,000. It doesn't matter if it's paid back or nothing. They will look at the worst case scenario on that credit card and they'll use it against you. So definitely a little something to be aware of there. Also, if you're trying to, maybe you're trying to buy another property and you've got a rental property or something along those lines, they will also scale back the rent that you receive on that property anywhere from 20 to 30%, possibly even 40%. So they won't take it at face value. Also, they do this on your employment contracts as well. They may even scale those back depending on your line of work, but I have heard of them scaling back that as well. Because they obviously they don't want you to go bankrupt, so they're not going to lend to you if they think that you can't make those payments. So number 3, now that you've ideally hopefully got that pre-approval, and usually this is good for maybe 6 months, even a year possibly, depending on the lender. Now you're free to go out and start shopping around. You can do a lot of legwork just online. There's amazing websites these days, especially in Australia and New Zealand. Here we have realestate.com.au, New Zealand we've got realestate.co.nz, and there's also a lot of different websites as well where you can compare different prices that other properties gone for in that area, which I recommend getting on there as well, just to make sure that the property you're looking at isn't with the same range. It's not over what the general area is being. Obviously things may change it if they've got a nice shed or a swimming pool or something like that, then that will increase the value of the property. Ideally, if you're just starting out, I know it's a bit hard if it's your first property and it's your dream home or something along those lines, then you sort of get emotionally attached to it, but try and take that emotion out of it. You can actually save yourself a fair bit of money here. Maybe if you're a bit of handy or a carpenter or something along those lines, you could even look at potentially buying yourself a little doer-upper. Nothing structural. I'd recommend staying away from sort of structural work, but if just a quick coat of paint or maybe a new bathroom, a new kitchen, all these things don't actually cost a lot, especially if you're doing the work yourself, and you could save yourself maybe $100,000 or depending, give or take. There's obviously a lot of different things to factor in there when looking at that, but that's a good way to save some money when you're looking at property. Like I said, it can be a little bit trickier, especially if this is your home that you want to be living in rather than an investment property. You can sort of detach yourself a lot from the emotion there if you're buying an investment property. Righto, so number 4. So you've found a property, you like it. Now the time comes when you put an offer on that property. Now I definitely don't recommend just going in and paying asking price. A little bit different if you're at an auction, you'll be competing with other bidders, which at the moment I think there's pretty fierce competition out there, especially if you're looking at buying in one of the big cities, either here in Australia or New Zealand. It seems like there's some pretty stiff competition out there in order to get your foot on the ladder. So you may get priced out at the auction as well. We're not going to go into how to go at an auction. That's a whole different ballgame in itself. I've only been to one auction myself, and it was only me at the auction, so that was a fairly easy auction to deal with. But now, let's say we're just going through a traditional, you're buying a property, you're putting an offer on it. Comes time to sign the contract. When you're signing this contract, ideally get your lawyer to look over this, but maybe there's no time for that. Always put some clauses within that contract. Even if you don't end up using these clauses, it just gives you a bit of added layer of protection there, especially if you find something that comes up when you do a builder's report, let's say on the property. There may be things on there that you weren't aware of. Unless you're a builder, then you can definitely see it, but for most of us that aren't builders, you definitely recommend getting a builder's report. Spend the extra $500 or whatever it may be. It's definitely worth spending. They will find things that you may have overlooked, especially if you're in love with the property. You might be just looking past a lot of things that actually may be structurally wrong with the property. Especially in New Zealand, they had a big, through the late 90s, there was the leaky home scandal that went through the country. A lot of homes that weren't watertight, so that's a big thing you should look out for in New Zealand as well. Generally, it's pretty easy to spot those sort of homes. They sort of have a particular look to them. But also in Australia as well, you could have termites, and there's a number of different things that can happen. Even all the floorboards or anything that could be rot in there, or borer, or there's a number of different things you need to look out for. So highly recommend spending the extra $500 or $800, whatever it may be, and get a licensed builder to look through the property. They'll probably send you about a 50-page report. Usually they go quite the opposite. And then another thing is you've got to factor in how much of the cost, there's things that might come up, and then you can use this as a bit of a leveraging tool, a bargaining tool with the person that's selling the property. Look, the deck needs to be replaced or whatever it may be. Can you knock some money off the asking price? So definitely worth spending that extra money there. And also subject to finance, subject to maybe a LIM report, council checks, and all these different things. Definitely recommend putting that in the contract. I did not do this when I bought my first property. I had subject to nothing, signed the contract, asking price, boom, boom, they accepted it away I went. Luckily I had the cash to buy it at the time. I went to the lawyers, I wasn't even too sure what I was doing. Went in and said, look, I think I bought this property, settles on such and such date, subject to nothing, and away I went. I didn't get a builder or anything to look over it. I had looked myself. I'm generally a pretty practical sort of guy, but definitely that was a stupid mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I should have got a builder to look over that. But that was mistakes you learn when you're buying your first property. So to round it off today, number 5, make sure you get insurance on that property, and get this for the day of settlement, or even a day before, just to be safe. You'd hate to be the owner of this property and then something happens within the next week or two. Let's say it burns to the ground, worst case scenario, then obviously you'll be out of pocket for that in total cost, or the rebuild, or whatever it may do, whatever damage was sustained throughout that period. So definitely, and this is regardless if it's for yourself or a rental property or anything, I highly recommend getting insurance on that property. Don't skimp out on that one. Spend a bit of extra money, get a good policy. Shop around a little bit. It's pretty easy to shop around these days online. There's some pretty comparable websites out there that compare different insurance companies, and they can give you some pretty sharp quotes for the different things. Can be a little bit tricky for landlord's insurance. I have been called out in the past with landlord's insurance where they didn't actually really cover me for some of the damages. Alright, so just a quick recap on the top 5 things. So number 1, save that 20% deposit to avoid the lender's mortgage insurance. Number 2, try and get that pre-approval from the bank. Definitely go in there with all your ducks in a row, all the paperwork you need. They will need everything. They will look through your bank details, everything, so don't try and hide anything there. Remember, try and reduce that credit card limit if you have a credit card. Number 3, start shopping around, start getting a feel for the market. Don't just buy the first place, go to open homes, look at online, get a bit of a feel for the different prices, different areas that you're looking at buying into. Number 4, you found a property, make sure you put in subject to whatever the different clauses may be, the builders, the finance, the LIM, the council reports, whatever it may be, definitely put that in the contract just before you sign the contract there. And number 5, make sure you insure that property. Anyway guys, that's my top 5 list of things to do before you buy your first home. Hopefully that was helpful. If you've got any questions or anything I covered off on there today, drop it in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. With that said, enjoy the rest of the day and we'll catch you in the next video. Cheers guys.